Hi everyone! So for this video we are going to be talking a little bit about run-on sentences, what they are, how they work, and how you can fix them. So you're going to want to make sure you have a piece of paper and a pencil handy so you can take some notes. Alright, so before we get going with what a run-on sentence actually is, we want to review what a subject and predicate are. So what we want to remember is that every sentence needs to have a complete subject and a complete predicate. So a complete subject is something that tells whom or what the sentence is about. So what we want to think is that these are like our nouns. They are going to tell us our people, places, and things. So when you're dealing with a sentence, every sentence has to have a noun. It has to have the thing you're talking about. So inside the sentence, the rain made the roads very muddy. The subject of this sentence is the rain because it is the noun. It is the thing I am talking about. The second part of every complete sentence is a complete predicate. Now, a predicate tells what the subject is or what it does. So a predicate always includes the verb. And remember that any verb is an action word. So these are things like walking, talking, bike, is, am, are, those kinds of words. So inside the same sentence, the rain made the roads very muddy. We know that the rain is the subject. It is the thing doing the action. The action the rain does is that it made the roads very muddy. Made is my verb, and the whole predicate, the whole part of it, is made the roads very muddy. So let's look at a couple of examples and separate between the two. So my first sentence reads, Joe waited for the train. In this sentence, my subject is Joe. He is the person doing the action. All right, what action did Joe do? He waited for the train. So we've got a subject with Joe, and we have the predicate with waited for the train. So let's do another one. Mary decided to take the bus. Well, Mary is the person who is doing my action, so she's the subject. And I would say, all right, what does Mary do? Mary decided to take the bus. Decided is my verb, so the whole second half of the sentence is the predicate. Okay, last one. Joe arrived to work before Mary. Well, I think Joe is doing the action here. He's my subject, and the action that he does is that he arrived. And if I extend the whole predicate out, what did he do? He arrived to work before Mary. So even though we have Mary in this sentence, she's not doing the action, so we don't really need to worry about her yet. So what is a run-on sentence then? If we know that every complete sentence needs to have a subject and a predicate, a run-on sentence is when you have two or more complete sentences that are joined without correct punctuation. What this means is that you've kind of taken two sentences and smashed them together in a way that we would do when we speak. But the problem is that when you wrote them down on paper, you didn't join them correctly. So there are two types of run-on sentences. Type number one are sentences joined with no punctuation. That means we didn't stop the first sentence using an end mark, like a period, question mark, or exclamation point. So when I read the sentence, the computer is a useful tool. It can be used for writing papers. This is a run-on sentence. When I read this, I look for subject and predicate. So the first thing I see is the computer. Okay, that's my subject. What does it do? The computer is a useful tool. So we have subject and predicate. That means that the things that follow have to be a different part of the sentence. So if I stop the sentence right here with a period and read a new sentence, it can be used for writing papers. It is my subject, can be used for writing papers is my predicate. So we have two sentences here that were originally joined with nothing in the middle. When I add a period and make this I capital, so capital I-T, what we now have is a complete sentence. So that's type one. The second type is for sentences that are joined with just a comma, and this is called a comma splice. So what we want to think about is that a comma can do a lot of things, but it is not strong enough to join sentences. And this is actually the more common problem that we see. The computer is a useful tool, comma, it can be used for writing papers. So we've got some separation between my complete sentences, but what we want to remember is that this comma here is not strong enough. It doesn't separate the sentences all by itself. You need to give it some help. So the key thing to remember here is that you never use a comma all by itself to join sentences. It is not strong enough. It can't stand on its own. So now that we've looked at our two types of run-on sentences, let's look at how to fix them. So the first way that we can fix run-on sentences is by using conjunctions. So a conjunction is a joiner word, and all that means is that it connects parts of things together. Parts of ideas, parts of clauses, parts of sentences. So I remember conjunctions by calling them fanboys, and fanboys represents all of our coordinating conjunction words. These are words like for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So we use these words quite often and quite frequently, but what we want to remember, we had said just a minute ago that a sentence is not strong enough to join another sentence together. What we can do is we can add in a fanboy, and that helps make the comma strong enough. So it's kind of like if you give something a little bit of extra help. So the way that this is written is that we take a sentence, we add a comma and a fanboy, and we can add it together to the other sentence. So what we want to remember is that when we are joining sentences together and you want to use a comma, you need to make sure that you use a fanboy as well. And for some of these, it doesn't matter which word you use. So we use and quite frequently. So some sentences it matters, and some sentence you could use a couple and it would still make sense. So let's look at some of the ways that we can fix a run-on sentence. There are 4 ways to fix a run-on sentence, and depending on what you are writing, you may find that you're using one way more than another, and that's perfectly all right. What's important to remember is that each way to correct a run-on has its own place, and you need to be comfortable using all of them. So the first way that we can fix a run-on is by just ending it. We're going to add a period and start a brand new sentence. So this is number 1 because this is the easiest way that we can stop a run-on. We just stop it where it starts. So here's an example. My grandmother refuses to go to bed early. She thinks she's going to miss out on some of the action. We have 2 complete sentences. In my first sentence, my subject is my grandmother. What does she do? She refuses to go to bed early. So we have a complete idea. In the second sentence, we have she, and what does she do? She thinks she's going to miss out on some of the action. So we have 2 complete sentences here, and what we've done is we've added a period and a new capital letter to separate them. This is the easiest way to fix a run-on sentence, but it's not the only way. The second way that we can fix a run-on sentence is by adding a comma and a cute little conjunction. These are those fanboy words. Remember, you have the words for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Those are your fanboys. And we had just talked about this where we said that commas aren't strong enough, so you have to give them a little help. So you need to add a fanboy. So here's my sentence with an example. My grandmother refuses to go to bed early, comma, and I'm afraid she's going to catch a bad cold. We have 2 sentences. My grandmother refuses to go to bed early. As we said just a few minutes ago, that was a complete sentence. In our second half, I is our subject. Am afraid she's going to catch cold is our predicate. So we've got a subject and predicate on both sides. So what we did is we used the comma and fanboy to join those sentences together. We could also change out this word and for something different. Maybe I could say, my grandmother refuses to go to bed early, so I'm afraid she's going to catch a bad cold. We can use some of these fanboys interchangeably. Just make sure that the sentence makes sense when you use it. A third way that we can fix a run-on is by using a semicolon by itself. Now a semicolon is the dot with the comma underneath it. Semi means part, so it is literally part of a colon. And a colon is where we have those 2 dots, one on top of one another. So when you're dealing with semicolons, you can place these where a period would have gone. The only difference is that we don't start the next sentence with a capital letter. It's going to stay small. So let's look at an example. In spite of her cold, my grandmother refuses to go to bed early, semicolon. She is afraid she will miss something. So I could have ended the sentence by doing a period and a new capital letter, and this would have been just fine. I also could have done a period or a comma in one of those fanboy words, and I also would have been just fine. We want to keep in mind that with semicolons, we don't want to use them a lot. They are kind of like salt. If you use them too often, it gets really overpowering. But if you use them just a little bit, it becomes a really nice add-on to your writing. The last way that we can fix a run-on is by adding a semicolon and what are called big ugly conjunctions. And there are also other transitional expressions. So we've talked in the past about what a transition word is. Some of these are words that you're going to recognize there. These are words like however, moreover, nevertheless, therefore, as a result, and consequently. But what we want to remember is that these have to follow a pattern. They have to be semicolon, transition word, and then they have to be followed by a comma. So the reason that this is number 4 is that this is one of the more tricky ones to do because there are lots of pieces to it. So let's look at the example and see how the sentence works. My grandmother has stayed up late 4 nights in a row. As a result, she cannot seem to get well. What we notice here is we do have 2 separate sentences, one in the front and one in the back. But when we look at how they're joining the sentences, we see a semicolon, we see a transition phrase, and we see a comma. So when we're joining with semicolons, you have the choice to do a semicolon all by itself like we saw up here, or to add in a transitional phrase. When you add in these transitional phrases though, just make sure that you add the comma as well. So these examples came from guidetogrammar.org. So if you want to take a peek at some of their other examples, I highly recommend checking it out. For your homework, make sure you are paying close attention to whether or not your sentence is a complete sentence or a fragment. And if it is a complete sentence, are you sure it's not a run-on? If you think it's a run-on, look for subject and predicate and decide where you're going to split that sentence in half. All right, good luck everyone.